Afternoon. Welcome to the REL Midwest webinar on supporting STEM in rural contexts. We're happy that you could join us. So I want to briefly introduce today's presenters. Can you go ahead and move to the next slide? Thank you. We have Dr. Heidi Williams from the American Institutes for Research. We have David Burns and Kelly Geyer-Evans from Battelle Education. Next slide. We also have joining us today Dr. Sally Pardue from the Tennessee Technological University. And last but not least is myself, Billy Day. I am a researcher at the American Institutes for Research and currently serve as a state liaison for REL Midwest, where I conduct outreach to rural serving organizations in Indiana. Next slide. Thank you. So today's agenda, during the webinar today, you'll learn more about STEM research, about STEM learning networks and how they can support schools, and about the STEMmobile initiative. You'll also have time to ask the panelists questions. Now, just briefly, a little bit about logistics. You'll see the menu bar at the top of your screen. Click chat to ask our presenters questions and to introduce yourself. So now's a good time, if you haven't already done so, to briefly introduce yourself in the chat box. So as you ask questions for the panelists, if your question is directed towards someone specifically, please indicate it. Otherwise, we'll leave it open for the panelists to answer those questions. If you need the closed captioning, the webinar does have live closed captioning, and you can click that button as well. Next slide, please. So I'll first begin by telling you a little bit about REL Midwest. The REL Midwest is a regional educational laboratory, and it's part of a network of 10 regional educational laboratories funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute for Educational Sciences, also known as IES. REL Midwest serves 7 Midwest states: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Next slide, please. The Regional Educational Laboratory Midwest works in partnership with practitioners, conduct applied research, and provide training, coaching, and technical support. Our mission is to support a more evidence-based education system. Next slide. So to address the priorities and interests of our state, REL Midwest supports 4 research alliances to help them understand the research and technical activities. Thank you. So we support 4 research alliances and networked improvement community, as well as emergent partnerships. So in Michigan, we support research on teacher preparation. In Wisconsin, we support research on the achievement gap. In Minnesota, we support research on the career readiness. And lastly, in Illinois, we support research in early childhood education. And we support 1 networked improvement community in Iowa, where we bring together rural districts to focus on using education technology to improve mathematics instruction. The next slide. So I'm going to briefly introduce Dr. Heidi Williams. She's a senior technical assistance consultant at American Institutes for Research, and she has had 35 years of experience in science and STEM education in rural communities. So with the Regional Educational Laboratory Southwest, she's working in Oklahoma to establish a networked improvement community focused on improving mathematics, teaching, and learning, particularly in rural areas. So previously, Dr. Williams worked with the Texas Hispanic STEM Research Alliance and the Oklahoma Rural Schools Research Alliance. So without further ado, I turn this presentation over to Dr. Williams to review the research.
Thank you, Billy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. One of the things that I wanted to bring forward is that when we start considering supporting STEM in the rural context, it's really critical to make sure that we understand there may be differences in how rural and even STEM is conceptualized and defined by the people in the room and the very community you're working in. This can make a difference to everyone at the planning table, your potential funders, students, parents, and the community. And that would also influence their support of your program. If this is not clearly defined and communicated, the planning team may find that they don't qualify for funding if you're applying for some additional funding, may not have the parent and community support, and there may be even differences in the strategies the team members feel are appropriate for the program. Cora, I still don't have control. I'm sorry. There. So let's begin right now. Over in the chat pod, would you write your definition of rural? Let's think about that. How would you define rural? Does everyone know? Oh. Ah, thank you, Catherine. Okay, this is very interesting. Oh, I like that one. 10 kids per square mile. That is very, very interesting. I haven't heard that one, but I like it. Whenever we start thinking about definitions, there are 4 distinct federal definitions of rural. And so if we start with the Census Bureau, they go with the not urban or an urban cluster. And they follow county lines. And whenever they start following county lines that way, sometimes you end up with suburbs that are classified as rural. Whereas if you go to the other side, another version, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, they look at county lines, but they also add in commuting patterns. And so when you start putting in the commuting patterns, you end up with the Grand Canyon that's counted as a metro county, which is quite interesting. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Research Services looks at counties as well, and they say not associated with large labor market areas. And the National Center for Education Statistics also looks at the distance from an urban area or an urban cluster. You notice all 4 of them start with urban and urban cluster and say it is not one of those, which is very interesting. So whenever you started thinking about your definitions that are showing up here in the chat pod, you may have had that, or perhaps it was closer to Merriam-Webster's definition, which relates to country, country people, country life, agriculture, farming. But I would caution, you've got all of the definitions, the federal definitions, and even within your groups, there's going to be differences within the same school. Some school teachers, administrators are going to feel that they are rural, and some will not. And so you need to really, when you start talking about planning support, thinking about what is rural, and does everyone at the table agree, and does your potential funding source qualify you as a rural area. So after you've developed your operational definition, another thing that I would challenge you to do that's going to help your planning of the support is to clarify what is STEM and what does it look like. If we look at the science and math discipline, they define STEM as an approach to teaching and learning science concepts. NSF, the National Science Foundation, defines it as a very transformative approach to traditional teaching and learning that fosters creativity and innovative thinking in all students. And also the science and math disciplines think of technology as a product of science, whereas if you go to the technology and engineering folks, they view technology as very independent of science. Their discipline emphasizes the generation of knowledge to produce change that benefits mankind through the application of the knowledge. So you've got different approaches. The technology and engineering may use STEM as a capstone project. very end, whereas science and math, it's an approach all the way throughout. So if you don't have an agreement on what is STEM, you might be at cross purposes. Then we start looking at some of the new acronyms, maybe some of them not so new. STEAM. STEAM being the addition of the arts. And some would argue, what do the arts have to do with it? But if you start thinking about it, the arts are very important, particularly look at the iPhones and the iPads. There's an artistic design built in there. So that would be a nice addition. Another addition would be STREAM, the addition of the reading into it. So that's very important. STEM-C, where we get into coding. Coding has become very, very important as far as STEM. And then the technology and engineering have felt that science and math has gotten too much of an emphasis, so they bring up the T and E as far as to bring that to a complete emphasis. And we've got E-STEM, which would bring in environmental sciences to focus and bring attention to that. And I would, so you've got a lot of different emphasis and approaches. And Albert Ports would argue then that this is leading to a STEM identity crisis. So your planning team really needs to clearly identify and clarify and communicate what is STEM? What does it look like in your program that you propose to bring? Otherwise, you might end up being at cross purposes within your own team. So when we start thinking about that, you've got STEM defined in the rural environment. So let's think about, why should STEM be an option in rural areas? We don't think of too much technology out there. But then the Committee on Education and the Workforce argues that if STEM is put into place well, then you're going to have it good for, the benefits will be good for the community and students, what they call reciprocal benefits, which is really where we want to go. It should benefit for those. So let's pause a minute. What would be some rural STEM careers that have a reciprocal benefit for the students and for their community? Could you put in some examples in your in the chat pod? Can you think of some? Engineering, ag sciences. Yes, the agricultural sciences, definitely. We start thinking about pest-resistant crops, the use of fertilizers. STEAM is very viable as far as farming, food processing, advanced manufacturing, seed sales, okay, the development of viable seeds, and even the agricultural research. So we're getting some really good examples of some careers that would be very viable in the rural community. Health sciences, most definitely the health sciences have shown up quite often in many of the rural communities I've worked with. So you're getting the idea. It's not a desert of STEM careers when we start talking about rural. And we really need to capitalize on rural assets. The National Association of State School Boards really says that you need to leverage on what is there and capitalize on them. Oh, winemaking with a smile, yes, definitely. But one of the things that we need to make sure is that when we start developing and supporting STEM programs, that it benefits both. We need to be sensitive to the rural community and that culture and environment out there. And so when we start expanding it beyond the school, we need to think about the ecosystem, a rural STEM ecosystem. Rappenhagen and Trail describe them as diverse, interconnected individuals in an adaptive relationship that evolves over time to support STEM learning from early childhood through adulthood. And those individuals can be family, the local economic base, government, regional government, local, federal, and each of them can work in their own way to support that STEM learning ecosystem. So strategic partnerships are very, very critical. It goes beyond the school. The school does really great stuff. They provide the courses, the counseling, the tutoring, online support, business and community. They can bring in internships. They can bring mentors. They can actually provide feedback on some of those problem-based projects that the students are working on. And they can start leading into very skilled STEM careers. And so you need to really, when you start thinking about supporting a rural STEM ecosystem, who are the champions? Who would be a good champion to help move this forward? So those are some considerations whenever you start developing these, your STEM program in a rural area. And right now I'm going to pass it off to David Burns, who's with Battelle, and he's going to give you some good practical experiences that he has worked on. David?
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Really appreciate the intro. My name is David Burns, Director of STEM Innovation Networks. I am here with Kelly Geyer-Evans.
Hi.
We are sitting in Columbus, Ohio, and we hope wherever you are, it's at least 10 degrees warmer. We're sitting at 17 degrees, and we're just not mentally nor physically ready or prepared for this.
It's cold.
Yes, thank you. Battelle, very interesting organization. We are the world's largest research and development company that's a nonprofit. We are mostly known throughout the United States as managing the national labs. We do things, security, healthcare, energy. Both Kelly and I work for a small group called Battelle Education, and we are the inside operation. We like to refer to Battelle two ways. One is Big Battelle, they run the national labs, and Little Battelle, we work primarily for what's on your screen, for the purpose of education, to basically benefit mankind. And what was interesting for us is we started through a will of a gentleman named Gordon Battelle. He actually wrote the will in 1921, and the building we're sitting in was built in 1929. The whole idea, he was a metallurgist. Part of the idea was to reinvent and take the proceeds of what was done in the commerce and put it back into education, making sure that men and women benefited through society. And that's what Battelle does, as it's kind of its DNA, and that's what Kelly and I do. We like to think every day of our lives. We started literally in the hardcore education business in 2006. We started one school. It was Metro Early College High School. Here's a young man, Ronnie Opong. He was one of the inaugural class. His notion here is, if it were my decision, STEM would be part of school every day. We'll come back and visit him. Metro, established in 2006, we advocate that most STEM schools, if not all, at least any that we work with, are inclusive, meaning you cannot attend one of our schools based on tests. We do a lot of interviewing around desire and ambition in the STEM fields, but not necessarily around academic ability. Metro's done very well. It's got a 100% graduation rate. Got some nice stats there. The kids do pretty well, specifically on the ACTs and the SATs. Not only do we say that, but there was a study commissioned, Dr. Sharon Lynch from George Washington University. She had an NSF grant to look at what inclusive STEM schools did. Metro was one of the participants within the studies. We found kids have stronger STEM career interest, have higher aspirations for college, and have higher GPAs and test scores. Those are nice statistics, but the real result of the inclusive STEM schools is more kids pursue STEM degrees in post-secondary education than your typical high school student. I think at Metro, the number of students to graduate, and I should say it's 50-50 women to men, the number of graduate, 44% of them pursue STEM degrees, where the national average is about 14%. As Dr. Williams was talking about, there's a lot of ways to define what STEM education is. And we've been butting up against the definition of STEM since we've started. So some people, it's very pillared: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We look at it a little bit differently. We think it's strategies that engage minds. This is a different approach, but it's more of getting the kids up, active, problem solving, doing design challenges, critical thinking, and what we have found is this appeals to a different kind of kid. The picture is of Jack McClintock. So one of the notions here is, are we just preparing the next generation of scientists do we have little kids running around in lab coats? And Jack's a pretty good example. He's got a film business, so he's way into the arts. And as Dr. Williams mentioned, there's always a push. When you encourage for a STEM education, there is a side that always says that must mean you are discouraging the arts. That's not true, or at least in our view, it's not true. You cannot have a good STEM program unless arts are integrated throughout. After our one school, we started something called the Ohio STEM Learning Network. That has continued to today. The slide says 11 schools, but here in 2017, we have over 40 STEM schools throughout the state of Ohio. We did the same model in Tennessee, the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network. Currently, that network started in 2010, and currently they have over 20 schools. We also operate something called STEMX. That has 21 states that participate. It's really around policy and advocacy. Long way of saying we've got a long vested interest in STEM education, but we also have a long-running problem. We find high-quality STEM programs can be found in urban areas. We are not finding them in the rural areas, or at least we're not aware of we see bits and pieces, but it's really it's a problem in Ohio, it's a problem in Tennessee, and honestly, it's a problem nationally. Our model here in Ohio and Tennessee depends on a post-secondary institution and a business and a K-12 district working together. That's just hard to find in a rural environment. Should note one of the other endeavors that we do for STEM is we manage a network called the AEOP, Army Education Outreach Program. We work with a consortium of partners to provide high-quality STEM programming throughout the United States. We like to have a lot of dots on the map, and the AEOP program allows us to have far greater reach than we would with just our two states. This is Ronnie, who we introduced a little bit earlier. I think both he and Jack, when they talk about their experience in a STEM school, they never ever talk about, man, that was the best calculus class I've ever had in my life, or that was the most wonderful biology teacher I ever know. What they do teach about, or what they do speak about, is the culture of the school, how they were engaged, how they had to problem solve, how they had to critically think, and how those skills actually translated into their normal life. So looking at STEM, long way of saying Patel's had a big interest in STEM. We're working Ohio, Tennessee, nationally, but how does that actually translate into a rural context? With that, Kelly Geyer.
Thank you, David.
So as David mentioned, our work here at Battelle really grew from that one small school metro into a larger national network. And so when we think about zooming into like what does that look like to educators inside this network, we wanted to share some of the work taking place inside inside the rural areas within the networks. So here in Ohio, we have Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton. We have many larger cities, but we also are surrounded by large agriculture communities. So when we look at some of the work taking place at Metro, we get a lot of partners very interested in how do we make this happen in other schools and other systems across Ohio and across the country. One of our partners, the Literacy Design Collaborative, was really working to find additional ways to embed literacy inside science classes in real, authentic ways. And so we started with a pilot at Metro, but very quickly we're saying, okay, we know Metro looks different, it feels different. So what does this look like inside a rural context? Being a part of the Ohio STEM Learning Network, we were able to go out to the different STEM schools across Ohio and ask some of the rural STEM schools if they were interested in participating. One of the lessons very early on that we learned is in any of the STEM schools across the network, it's important that they bring in their local environment. When David's talking about the partnership between the university, the business, and the school system, that looks very, very different in a rural environment than it does here in Columbus. So when we invited them to come and talk to some of the teachers participating in this work here in Columbus, we then sat down and had a conversation about, is this something that you were interested in? What are some of the unique characteristics about your school? And some of the first things that we learned, going back to Heidi's conversation about, you know, what are some of the careers that are that you see in rural environments. And so very quickly it moved from not just the science classroom, but we need to make sure that we're incorporating our ag teachers. One of the things the superintendent said immediately was, you know, our science teachers don't have anyone else to talk to. Every day they're in classrooms by themselves. They don't have another teacher teaching biology, teaching physics, teaching chemistry. So can we think about including other schools which are still close by and really working on building those relationships? So as we took the success that we had in an urban environment and began thinking and exploring what it would look like inside the rural environment, we brought together 5 different school districts that weren't necessarily in the same county, because just because they were in the same county didn't mean that they were close to each other. And so we look at 5 districts across 3 different counties, but that are closer together than maybe some of the schools that are on the other side of the same county. We were able to still pull in some of our professionals here at Battelle, our researchers, our engineers, to come and meet with the teachers during that first year. One of the important things to note in terms of the structures, we talked about the 5 districts involved. We also knew that we could come in and bring some of the teachers and educators that were doing this work at Metro to lead and teach about the method and talk about what they've seen in their classroom, but that we wouldn't be able to connect those teachers inside the everyday classroom, you know, Monday through Friday. And so there were, we found another partner that was already inside some of those classrooms, inside some of those schools, and we were able to bring them into the training. That way they were able to provide some of that day-to-day in the classroom support. Another partner in this project was the PAST Foundation. We don't do evaluation, and so we were able to pull them in to be a evaluator of the project, and we're still waiting. We're in year 2 of this work, so we're still conducting that evaluation.
So just a question: you have people in the classroom working with the teachers hand on hand. From an outsider's view, that wouldn't be too sustainable. Do you try to get the training down?
Yeah, so, and that actually leads right into the next point. So with as we're in year 2 right now, year 1, we pulled in teachers and educators from Metro who were using the work. Now, that was with a cohort of 15 teachers across those 5 districts. This year, they identified additional science teachers within those 5 districts, moved down a little bit more into the 5th grade, and the teachers that participated in year 1 were really pushing to become the experts. In terms of sustainability, it's really important that you develop that expertise locally so that they're able to have those peer-to-peer relationships with cohort 2. The other piece that we noticed is inside, and you know, everybody thinks it's unique, rural, suburban, urban, but it's easy to come into a school and say, like, your kids can do this. It's a very different thing when you're sitting down with a teacher across the hall and you're looking at student work and saying, oh, our kids can do this. And so buy-in just completely changes. The project itself was around, like I said, embedding literacy into science, and so the school district also said we really are focusing on design, the STEM school, and then we want to make sure that we're getting this design out to the schools in our surrounding area as well. So here you see an example from the 5th grade classroom of the kind of the reading, the research. They're doing testing and collecting data, but then being able to write about their experience. And so we learned a lot from year 1. We've made a lot of adaptations based on the feedback, ongoing feedback from the teachers. In year 2, I think the really important lessons are that the teachers have seen that kids are incredibly engaged and that they're seeing the level of the writing that kids are producing go up while learning the discipline. So this is one example. There are many other examples of what this looks like, but I think the key lessons are really listening to the district, learning about their specific needs, making sure that they are in on the planning from day 1, and that you have ongoing meetings reflecting and listening to the key stakeholders throughout, and that you're finding a way quickly to help build the expertise. That way it's not always feasible for us to be there all the time, especially in large states where the rural communities could be hours or flights away. So thank you for letting us share. We're happy to answer any questions as we get to the Q&A portion.
We're going to be turning this over to Dr. Sally Pardue. I will say the benefit of running a lot of large networks and meeting different people is you come across people who are really dedicated to education. And I think both Kelly and I would say we are blessed to know Dr. Sally Pardue.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Kelly. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of share with you is a little bit about who I am. I'm Sally Pardue. I teach mechanical engineering at Tennessee Tech University. And Tennessee Tech University is located in a set of counties, and you'll see a map here in part of the presentation to give you a sense of where we are in Tennessee. But Tennessee has many rural regions, as many of our states do throughout the U.S. And what we often find is that even amidst the rural setting, there's usually one county or a community that's kind of a hub for the region. So it might be where, for instance, in our case, a university is located in a town, and there is a different set of resources that come into play, but yet you drive 20 minutes and we're full rural again. So I think part of knowing that regional context and history of your own locale kind of helps you leverage the resources. And so what I'm going to give you an example of today is how the STEMmobile is one solution that is working here in the Upper Cumberland. And to give you a little bit of history about it, to kind of tie it into the context of, you saw David put a short map of Tennessee, was up for a few minutes ago, that showed the hubs across the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network. And the Upper Cumberland was one of those little stars, but then we represent a whole region, about 7,500 square miles, 20 school districts, and our school districts here in Tennessee are arranged around the county line structure. So we're talking about, again, 7,500 square miles, 20 school districts. The idea of everybody coming to one location to have a STEM experience, for instance, visiting the university, it just doesn't make sense, because putting kids on a school bus for an hour and a half doesn't really translate well. So as I kind of take you through the next series of slides, I'm going to be talking about the STEMmobile, but I'm going to keep using some of the language that Heidi mentioned in her opening, which is the ecosystem, thinking about the whole infrastructure of not just education, but about the workforce development. Every county, every municipality, whether it's rural or urban, usually has a chamber of commerce associated with it. And how are we connected to the workforce needs to kind of understand what can be leveraged from their work, their enterprise in the K-12 classroom. One of the things about the Upper Cumberland Rural STEM Initiative, and I seem to not be having slide control, thank you, there we go, is that, again, we're partnered at a university, but we really represent a whole region. And so our work together over the last 4 years, started in 2012, was really driven by this challenge that we posed to ourselves. How do we design ways to support learning in the Upper Cumberland part of Tennessee as an example, perhaps for the nation, of sustainable rural STEM education? And as anything goes, we always start with the people. We should start with the people. We are often very curious about the money numbers as well, and I'll share some of that information with you. But I did want to give you a sense of the impact that the UCRSI, Upper Cumberland Rural STEM Initiative, has had to this point. We've worked with more than 10,000 regional Tennessee students in grades pre-K through 8, and that number grows daily, obviously. But the design comes from this kind of hub infrastructure that is key to the innovation network that started in Ohio and was translated to Tennessee's implementation. And so here in the Upper Cumberland, what we did as a hub was to build direct partnerships with 20 school systems, 20 directors of schools, 20 supervisors of instruction. We intentionally asked each one of those counties to identify a rural, truly rural school, not the school that's in the county seat, but maybe the school that's out at the fringe of the county. Pick up that rural school and meet with the principal and have the principal identify 2 of the innovators in his or her school. And so we identified 40 hub teachers, 20 hub principals, 20 supervisors of instruction, 20 directors of schools. That's the only way any of this works, is to build that network of people. And then at the same time, we had a platform school at the center of it all, which is here in Putnam County in the city of Cookeville. We had a Prescott South Elementary and Middle School identified by the county to say, let's make this the STEM school. Let's flip an existing school. They did happen to be moving into a new building, but it was an existing school population, and let's make it pre-K-8. So that's why we had the 2 principals. One side was pre-K through 4, the other side was 5 through 8. To make all this happen, we identified a partnership team on the university campus, and then further we connected out with 15 plus partners throughout the Upper Cumberland, one of which I would challenge any of us to always remember is your public broadcasting system. Think about people you don't normally think about connecting with. So as anything goes, though, it is nice to know how the numbers kind of play out. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of seed money to get an idea rolling. So what happened for the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network through the Upper Cumberland implementation, we had about $500,000 allocated to us for 2 years. Of that $500,000, we spent about $80,000 to do this thing called the STEMmobile. Out of that set of funds, we partnered that $80,000 with a $100,000 gift that we got from the Tennessee legislative body, and a further $250,000 gift that we actually received from Tennessee Tech directly. So the STEMmobile story that I'm about to tell you is roughly about $400,000 to get the STEMmobile up and running. And then from the get-go, to think about what happens when the grant funding's gone and there's not the ability to fund this initiative anymore, we asked our partners to think about going ahead and stepping up and meeting half of the routing costs for the STEMmobile. So that meant for a school to host the STEMmobile for a week at a time. The cost was priced out to about $2,000 a week. It lives at the school for 24/7. They can use it around the clock if they want. But we asked them to put up half the money so that they knew from day one that that would be part of the sustainable process. When we look at the STEMmobile as a technology solution, we have to think about how are people going to use it. So we created a series of STEM education modules in partnership with those 40 teachers that I mentioned, those hub teachers as well as the platform teachers. And we created modules that were place-based. When we think about Tennessee and we recognize its rural history, agricultural is still very much a part of the dialogue of many students as they grow up in rural areas. So we decided to create a module that we could leverage existing resources already in the education world. So Michigan Model for Health, some of you might be familiar with some of the wonderful resources that have come out of that program. We came up with the idea of let's do something called food body health. So if you think about what young students are learning, and we've got this picture of every kid loves to play doctor or nurse at some point in their life. And we think about the connecting all of that knowledge of where does the food come from, how does it impact our body, how does that impact our health as we grow. So that's an example of one of the modules that we came up with. And then we implemented with Tennessee Tech support, we went and took the technology route and said, okay, if we're talking about distributing accessible resources, let's figure out how we can do so. So we made iPad apps, and we worked with teachers to create legacy cycles, and that's a technique of project-based learning that I would be happy to have you learn more about. You can find out about it in the paper that's mentioned at the references section at the end of the presentation. The legacy cycle starts with a challenge, and then it invites us to know multiple perspectives, to do a generation of ideas, to do research and revise, to constantly test our mettle through formative assessment. And then the big idea is that you always tell a story at the end of it, so you have a go public opportunity. So anytime we did teacher professional development throughout the life of this grant, we always asked the teachers to go public, to create a legacy cycle type lesson plan that they could share with their fellow teachers. And that's the way we designed all the STEM modules. So one way to roll out resources is to, again, kind of provide things that come to you. And so we were inspired as one of the outcomes that we wanted to see happen to create this thing called a STEMmobile, and to be able to take resources to the classrooms in these rural communities. Things like microscopes and data acquisition devices and batteries and circuit measurement techniques and all the kinds of things that we heard teachers tell us, we'd love to have this. We'd love to put this in the hands of our kids. And we thought, all right, let's put it into a box and let's put the box on the road. And so you can see the routing that we're talking about here, this part of the Upper Cumberland of Tennessee, 7,500 square miles. You want to identify your road systems. You want to make sure that the trailer, whatever it is going to be able to get where it needs to go. And think about the history of your region. So this image actually comes from a Tennessee Valley Authority historian had located this image, and I thought it was just really appropriate. It's an early STEMmobile. Think about the bookmobiles and the way they service the regions that we all care about. So this is the 21st century version of a bookmobile. It's knowledge at the fingertips of children, guided by the adults that work with them and care about them. And so what you see here is some images on the inside. All the details of this STEMmobile initiative can be found in that paper that I mentioned, and you can certainly contact me if you're curious about learning more about the technology side of it. But of course, as anything goes, when you put a new program into place, you have to know how is it working. You have to be able to show people. So from day one, you always need to be thinking about what kind of data can you easily collect? Can teachers be a part of helping you provide? So one of the things that we did with the STEMmobile and continue to do today in its 5th year of routing is to collect pre-post information with the students. So quick surveys, and of course we've tried it by doing app surveys on an iPad. We've quickly discovered kids get too distracted by all the cool things of the iPad and don't really want to answer the questions. So strangely enough, even in the 21st century, we're still doing paper pencil quick survey work. And what you see here on the next 3 slides is just some very initial glimpses of the data that we have coming to us now. These are examples of pre-post average scores amongst a group of students. And from the first year of routing in 2013-14, we were able to create 1,000 matched pairs of data looking across the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade activities. We have the same types of things for the younger. When we think about pre-test and post-test scores, sometimes a histogram like this says a story that people at your Chamber of Commerce can get behind. So you got to think about how you're going to tell your story with your data. From the ecosystem point of view, the STEMmobile is just a piece of the whole story. So one of the things that we constantly want to engage the public with is this idea of career pathways. And so here in the Upper Cumberland, one of the things we did was to also engage the public by saying, will you help us make a video? And so those became part of the multiple perspectives and those STEM modules of learning that kids had access to. The other way to think about your public engagement is all of the working professionals that are in your community do want to be engaged, but they may just not remember or know how to talk to the age group of kids. So thinking about training programs for the STEM volunteers themselves, people that you would have in the classrooms. How to build capacity for the teachers themselves. So in our work, we actually are constantly trying to help teachers become better grant writers and give them opportunities to bring resources into their classroom. One of the kind of thinking forward aspects, and I guess I just encourage you as I wrap this up here, is to become aware of what else is going on in your community. So for us in the Upper Cumberland, we became part of a program called Pathways to Prosperity. And that is very much of a workforce-driven concept, which is to constantly be thinking about how do parents, how do community members, how do youth themselves know about the jobs that are available to them, and how can that impact the learning that they're doing in the classroom. And so Pathways to Prosperity is an initiative that is national. You could find it in your area and find out whether or not it's something that you could become a part of. So for us here in the Upper Cumberland, STEM education is all about constantly leveraging the other initiatives, and these are just some examples. And as we think about what's next, it's becoming aware of data that you might not normally pay attention to, such as that labor market data, understanding what are the new pathways that might be emerging. We talked about health sciences and IT. With information technology advances, the geographical regions aren't as isolated anymore. So thinking about how we can use IT to help meet those needs and connect educators across this process of STEM education. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and turn us over to a Q&A time.
Hi, quickly, I just want to thank Dr. Williams, David, Kelly, and Dr. Perdue for a really excellent overview. And just as a reminder, so everybody's back online. Thank you. So now it's time for questions from the audience. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. But in the meantime, we did have several questions that came through earlier when you guys were registering. So I'll get started. The first question is for Dr. Williams. And the question is, are there emerging practices to get more pedagogical content knowledge to rural science teachers? Heidi, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
The pedagogical content knowledge, PCK, that they have found for science and STEM actually transcend urban to rural. I think what we really need to think about is what would be most advantageous in the rural communities, and focusing on providing those educators with specific training on how to teach and operate in that environment. And that's where we're having the biggest need right now.
Excellent. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that as well? Again, this is asking about practices for getting more pedagogical content knowledge to rural science teachers. Okay. So the next question that we had is, what have you found to be effective partnership models between higher education and P12 districts related to STEM education?
This is David from Battelle. The most effective models, I'm sure this sounds trite, but when you have both the K-12 teachers and the higher ed teachers sitting at the same table, that's a great start. But we're seeing a lot of summer bridge programs and a lot of first year, second year students at maybe in grades 11 or even 10th grade experiencing their college, taking their first college experience as a cohort. There's a trend in Ohio, I think it's everywhere, for adjunct professors to be involved in the STEM schools or coming to the STEM schools. From our point of view, the more you can get the kids into the school and on the college campus, the more pure of a experience it is, in ensuring that the kids are absolutely successful at the post-secondary level. I think I will say this as a father, one of the worst things that you can do to a 10th grade student or 11th grade student is send them over to college so they can fail a class. That, no support systems. Our most successful are those bridges that we build to the post-secondary institutions that have multiple supports already built within, coming both from the post-secondary and the K-12 world.
Can I weigh in on that too? Kind of building forward from what David shared, I do want to say that what I'm finding out for our region is that the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, so the certification programs, as well as the community colleges, are definitely a big piece of what we are seeing students and families being able to latch onto in terms of career awareness. And so that partnership of post-secondary, and I like that phrase that David used, it has to be all of those post-secondary options. And those advanced placement students that we're usually thinking about when we say STEM doesn't have to be that. It can be work-based learning for a student who is taking mechatronics and is going to be earning a certification degree from an applied program. They can be having an early learning experience too, a work-based learning opportunity. So I think it's that full spectrum, and opening up the college ready to be the phrase career and college ready. So the effective partnership models are out there. Pathways to Prosperity is one of them, about how to engage across the full spectrum of what supports our youth for the future.
Thank you. So we have an additional question, I think, that sort of gets into what Dr. Pardue was talking about, and that specifically, how do you connect our remote rural students with STEM industry professionals and opportunities that may or may not exist in the community?
Right. So one of the ways I think we have to get incredibly creative is the use of well, exactly what we're doing here. So thinking about dynamic ways to use a webinar connection between a working professional who doesn't have the time to get in the car and drive 2 hours to visit with a class. We want that human interaction, but how can we accomplish it using technology? So we've actually been exploring some ideas about sending out webcams to working professionals and saying, can you get permission to wear this for the day and take us on a walk about your plant? So because again, people who live in rural areas will get in a car and drive an hour, hour and a half to a job, and then come back home because they love where they live. And so we need to be able to kind of think creatively as educators. How do we open up that technology window and really invite the idea of what jobs look like today into the classroom?
And I'll just add on to what Sally said. One of the things that we've seen, so I also do a lot of work with our computer science across the state. One of our schools has a iPad that they've mounted on, and they have I forget the name of it, but it's their school robot. And so they will send an educator with their school robot to go do a virtual or to go do a tour of a different industry partner. And so the kids will be able to get to experience it through the eyes of their robot and see the different ins and outs. The other thing that I would encourage that we've also heard is that sometimes there's a little bit of fear around things like computer science, and oh, does that mean that my kid's going to move across the country and not stay here? And so I think also being creative in finding different industries that are in those rural environments that you can share how they use computer science as well. That way you're also saying that there are opportunities here in our community to really use and apply STEM, careers available to you here. You don't see all that brain drain as well.
Right, I would support that as well. You really need to look at the community environment, and there are STEM careers and opportunities there, and some of them may not be exactly in the community. If you have some that are remote or very remote, they can Skype. And one of the best ways to get them is to have a mentor Skype in while they're doing a project or a problem-based, addressing a challenge. And so they're actually getting a relationship and seeing that this is possible. They develop that STEM identity, which is so critical for them to even consider before they jump into the college environment.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in again. This is Kelly. Heidi, you made me think of another example. We had a design challenge. It was a elementary STEM school in Florida where they were designing a local solution to the lionfish challenge in the waters there. And so they Skyped with an expert to help get them some to talk about some of their solutions and get feedback. So I think like when you're thinking about those different design challenges and real problems to the community, who are the experts that you could maybe Skype in with? Even if they aren't in the community, the problem itself might be something that's facing the community.
Thank you. Those are really excellent suggestions. Okay, so we have a series of questions that are asking about funding for these types of initiatives. And so they sort of move from, besides IES, what are some other options for funding as people on the call try to think about expanding the opportunities in their own communities?
This is David. I'll start, but I'm sure Dr. Pardue will jump in. You know, we're all in the same boat. We all chase after dollars, and from Battelle's viewpoint, and this is mostly through the STEMX notion where there's 21 states, everybody's asking the same question. Our response is, if you have something that's actually very engaging, empowering for rural students, this is probably the best time to seek funding that I've ever seen. Places like NSF have seen that there is a real need here and that they are pushing a lot of STEM funding specifically around the rural environment. The big players in the game are the technology places. Look at Facebook, look at Apple, even look at Google. It's not like they're handing out money. I would suggest from both Battelle's viewpoint, which is we go after money and we give out money in that notion, the more compelling of a solution that you may propose, the better for you. So I don't want to ever push that it's because of a lack of money we can't do these things. We honestly believe, and it's not being with our heads in the sand, if you build it, they will come. And so I'll drop away for Sally there.
So funding I often find is it's not always dollars. It's really just the time sometimes that we need from people. So if we think about the fact that, and I have this conversation almost daily with some of my friends at the university and in the community, many of us already have jobs. And so sometimes it's not doing more beyond the job that we have. It's thinking about how we want to do our job differently. And so when we talk about equipping teachers with techniques that they can use in the classroom, if we will, so there's this, from the world of engineering and the world of business, there's this thing called the quality triangle. So if you imagine three sides of the quality triangle, one being the funding, the money that's allocated to a project, the other being the time, and the other being the quality to commitment or the commitment to quality. So you've got quality on one side, you've got dollar resources, and then you've got people time. And so when you think about, we all want high quality. We know high quality often has a cost, a real dollar cost to it. And so we often want it very quickly. And so I think the reality that comes in on any funding cycle is when you start thinking about how do you really fund both from the people, time, and the money. We're not going to compromise on quality. We want great quality. So we're probably going to have to admit that it's going to take time. And understanding what it means to kind of change a practice, change a community, build a community. One of the things that we've tried to do constantly from day one when we think about funding is to think about a big blueprint. Everything that you want to try to do, you're never going to get it all funded at once. So which piece of it can you work? What's the pivotal point? If you're building a house, should it be the kitchen you build first or the bedroom? So thinking about what is the most at core value, thinking about the companies that we want to engage. So companies often have a philanthropic funding mechanism that is tied to the local community. Every community has a Walmart. I mean, that's one of the great success stories of the United States of America, right? As our ability to leverage access to goods. And so how does Walmart play in? What are the classroom level initiatives that a teacher working against a master blueprint with their principal in that school system, with the approval of the director of schools, could say, this year I want to learn how to do just this one thing, but it's a part of the big picture. So $500 is enough. It doesn't have to be $500,000. So learning how to think at scale about funding, I think, is part of the solution.
Perfect. Thank you. So that wraps up about all the time we have today for questions. If we can go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So again, I want to quickly thank our presenters, Dr. Williams, David, Kelly, and Dr. Pardue. And just briefly, if you have Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter and visit our website for the latest updates on events and publications at https://IS, and you can see the rest of it on your screen. Next slide. For more information, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or any additional follow-up thoughts. Thank you again for joining us today.